can see all that clearly enough, can you?
Yeah. Lance, Jonathan, yep.
Just write your name on top of that, please. That there. You just put your name on the top. Fill in the details. 33rd.
What address? Your address.
Your home address.
My home.
Yeah.
What is the meaning NSP?
That's your NZQA National Student Number. Don't know what it is, don't worry about that, I wasn't looking up the book. Hearing well enough, Mr. Marshall? Yep. Okay, so in front of you, I've given you a couple of books. This one here is student study guide. It's got everything you need to know in it. Unfortunately, it's written in a logical progress for reading about something. But the assessment material, that one there that you've got, is written directly off the NZQA unit standard, and that's written in a logical sequence for measuring somebody's understanding of something. The two are not the same. So if we tried to work off the study guide, you'd be here the whole day, just leaping backwards and forwards through here trying to find the answers. You don't have time for that, and it's going to waste, you're going to get so frustrated with it, there's no point in trying to teach you like that. So you've got the books, they're there to read them. This one here's a cut down version, the one that you carried in your cab, so you've got it there as a reference guide if you need it. But for the purposes of our assessment, we're going to do everything off the screen. All right? It's an open book assessment. I'll actually tell you which questions the next little section of the course is going to answer. Most of the time you can put down your answers in your own words, as long as you make sure you've covered the concepts that we want. But there are a couple of occasions where it will actually be quite important for you to write it down exactly as I put it on the screen. And when we get to those points, I will tell you that. There's only a couple of places where okay, so let's begin with some introductions. First of all, my name's Brian Parker. I've been a commercial driver trainer now for almost 40 years, getting close to the 40-year mark. And I've been involved in heavy transport since 2000, basically. I've had my own driving school down in Waikato Bay at Pinty prior to 2000. I had a staff working for me full-time and a couple of part-timers. I sold my business to Pathway, who used to be, at that stage, just over the corner, next street over. They're now down in Onehunga. I came up here from Hamilton as the training development manager for the whole team. And then since 2007 I've been working in industry. I've been driver training manager at Ontario, logistics at TR Group, working for their rental clients, and lately with Specialist Lifting and Transport Group, which is Transcar Heavy Haulage and Machinery Movers. Obviously their vehicles around, but bring all the concrete panels around the place. And for the last year, so I was there for 5 years. They got taken over by TIL Group, who are now called Move Logistics Group, so they've undergone a name change recently. And I've moved up basically to the office, so I run the training team for the whole group throughout the country. Okay, just a quick intro, just tell me who you are, what you're doing BESS for, and how much driving experience you've got. Start with you.
Oh, well, Mark. I just drive all the vehicles, basically.
Okay.
I'm like, help these guys. So these guys are the pump operators.
Yep.
And because we've got the two overloading trucks here, now 42 and 47.
Yep.
So if they need to be swapped out or anything like that, then I can go and then release them from that, so they don't exceed their driver hours.
So these vehicles are operating on permanent overweight.
Are they?
The drivers need to do it.
Yeah.
Oh yes, I know the drivers need to do it. Yeah, I'm just trying to get my head around the reason.
Yeah, because just in case we go out of Auckland,
Right.
and some places 47 is not allowed
Yeah.
because of its weight.
Okay. Yeah.
It's 31 ton something.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So just.
But maybe we'll be operating here.
Yeah.
And
My name is Jonathan Gonzalez. I also drive in the truck.
yeah. And
Then,
how many years have you been driving?
That one.
No, how many years?
How many years
Yeah.
driving experience?
Yeah.
Maybe 3
Okay, that's good.
I have experience for 15 years for the driving.
Yep.
The truck was the first driver in the Netherlands. Yeah, and then I was working here now. I have a business driver for any kind of.
Right. Yep.
You all right?
One of the pump operators, and I drive a few pumps around.
Yeah, I'm in the middle of it. Yeah.
That's why they want us to do it, and I've got
What-
Your name is?
Ronald.
Okay. So, first of all, you need to turn your phones off, or if you have to stay in communication, at least put it on silent mode.
Yeah.
First one that interrupts the course with a phone call applies the meters.
We had too many last one,
Okay. Toilets, just in case I need one.
Straight through.
Yeah.
Okay. This is only a 3-hour program. I'm not proposing to take a refreshment break in the middle of it. All right, I'm sure what you need, it's a long weekend, you want to get home, so
Yeah.
go straight through. If you need to take a break, a toilet break, or you need to go and get yourself a cup of water or something in the middle, just say so and go. All right. And emergency evacuation point. Straight opposite here.
Straight outside.
Okay, that's good. Thank you. Okay, so the legal requirements that are relevant to this unit standard, we've got the Health and Safety at Work Act. Can't get away from that. It applies to every work site. Do I need to talk to you about that? No? Okay. The Land Transport Act is an important one for us. That's the act that gives the NZTA the right to exist and to make rules and regulations. It also contains all the transport legislation that the politicians want to keep control of rather than having government bureaucrats make rules. Right? So things like how much alcohol you can have and still be allowed to drive, and how much fines you have to pay when you get it wrong, and all that sort of stuff. Right? The Land Transport Road User Rule is the one that the name suggests, tells us all about how to use the road, what side of the road you drive on, who you're trying to do, etc., etc. And that's the legal basis for the road code. Like all legislation, it's a legal document. It's hard for ordinary people to understand, so the road code is a plain English translation of that. The heavy vehicle rule, that's more around the importers and manufacturers of vehicles that they can't do. It sets out all the parameters for designing and building to do that. The traffic control devices rule is more around the STMS people, but there's also stuff in there that is relevant for load pilots, who of course we often have to work with when we are doing this. And then finally there's the vehicle dimensions and mass rule, usually called the VDAM rule, and that basically, as a heavy haulage driver, is your Bible. In there are pages and pages and pages of tables that tell you how much weight different axles can carry at different spacing, which is an important one for you. And there are also rules in there around load piloting, and most particularly there are rules in there about taking heavy vehicles over bridges, which is why you're here doing this course. Alright, other things that are useful to us is the industry code of practice for traffic control at bridges being crossed by overweight vehicles. Horrendously long title. That's a document put out by the Heavy Haulage Association, but it is recognised as the government as the approved code of practice for the heavy haulage industry. So if you do something wrong and you end up in court, the judge is going to say to you, was what you were doing in compliance with the code of practice? That's the piece of paper he's talking about. If the answer is no, you're in deep shit. Right? We have the Load Pilot Driver Code. Now that's available as a free download from NZTA. I would encourage you to read it. It used to be that you could answer 15 questions at the end of it and you made your Class 2 load pilot licence. They've tightened up on the rules on that now. You now actually have to go through an external assessment process to get that Class 2 licence. But I would encourage you to do so.
Get that license.
Get that Class 2 licence. Yeah. It's a valuable qualification for you, but it also gives you a clear understanding of the other side of the team of pilots and overweight vehicles. Transcar heavy haulage, all our heavy haulage drivers are qualified pilots, and all our pilots, if they're not truck drivers, are also qualified for BESS even though they're not truck drivers. So they have to have a clear understanding of each other's responsibilities. Right. Yep.
Anybody can do this BESS course.
You have
With
to,
Class 1 license.
You have to get permission from the NZTA to do the BESS course.
Oh, okay.
Alright, anybody can do the Class 2 load pilot licence,
Oh, okay.
as long as you've got a minimum for Class 1 licence, because you're going to be able to drive a pilot vehicle. We also have the official New Zealand Heavy Road Code, Heavy Vehicle Road Code. And the second half of that document is the truck loading code, so it's also a valuable document for you. And then finally there's the NZTA VDAM permitting manual. That's the publication put out by NZTA that tells you everything about the process for applying for permits, how to go about it, what you have to be able to provide them with in the way of evidence and all that sort of stuff. I wouldn't expect drivers to have a copy of that, but the company certainly should. Because somebody in the company is going to have to apply for permits for it. Okay, other resources that are relevant to us, there's the overweight and the over-dimension route maps that used to be available as a free download from NZTA, but they've recently taken them down. Hopefully it's because they're revising them, because they were a bit out of date. The overweight and the over-dimension route maps are not quite the same. There are some places where you could take a vehicle that was overweight across the bridge, but you wouldn't be able to take an over-dimension one. And there are lots of places where you can take over-dimensional vehicles, but they're not strong enough for an overweight one. So there are some variations between. Information for operators of over-dimensional loads. There's a document from Kiwi Rail. I'll show you an example of that here. Here we are, that's this document here. So that's also available for a free download. Just pass around so you can have a quick look at it. That tells you about your requirements for crossing railway lines. Right? NZTA owns the road that goes across the railway lines, but the railway authority owns the railway tracks themselves. For instance, if you have got more than an axle loading of more than 12 tonnes, then you have to get permission from Kiwi Rail to cross the tracks, and they will charge you a small fortune to send somebody out and lean on his shovel while he watches you do it. Right? Oh, it's more to it than that. That's because they've got to time in with the train movements and all that sort of stuff. So they're very restricted windows that you can use. Okay, and the study guide and the quick guide I've already talked to you about. So that's all we talk about on there. Alright, so let's begin the guts of this now with a definition. We keep talking about bridges, but what do we actually mean by a bridge? A bridge is a structure that is designed to carry a road or a path over an obstruction, like a river, a road, or a railway line, by spanning across it. And it includes culverts with a waterway area greater than 3.4 square metres. And it also includes stock underpasses. You don't see many of those in Auckland, although there is one. But we certainly see a lot of those in rural Waikato, for instance. How big's a waterway area greater than 3.4 square metres? Well, think about the size of a stock underpass, that's about right. Alright. Where's the only stock underpass in Auckland? It's actually under Great South Road at Penrose. It goes from where the old stock holding yards used to be, underneath Great South Road, across to where the freezing units used to be at South Junction. It's still there. So you're going to be assessed against all three of the elements of the unit standard. Right? It's 23436, demonstrate knowledge of self-supervision requirements for overweight vehicles crossing bridges. It's an open book assessment, as I said before. You can refer to any of your resources, but we'll work from the screen. And notice I put this presentation in blue. That's a hint to you. Anytime you see something in blue, it's likely to be the answer to a question. Hint, hint? Okay. So, once you're credited with this unit standard, you will have demonstrated your knowledge of the overweight permits themselves. You will be able to identify the location of your vehicle on your route. You will be able to identify the location of bridges using the bridge location markers. And you will have demonstrated your knowledge of the supervision requirements for crossing bridges. Right? If your answer doesn't clearly demonstrate your understanding, then I may have to ask you a supplementary question which we will record in your book together with the answer. If you need to change an answer, it's okay, you can do that, but what's not okay is scrubbing out your original answer to the point it can't be read. The moderators, the people who are making sure I'm doing my job right, they want to see what your original answer was, and if necessary, an explanation as to why it's been changed. So So if you need to change an answer, cross it out with a single line, put your initials there so they know it was you that changed it, not me. Right, and then as I'm going through the marking, if I think any further explanations needed, we'll put it in at that point. And then I will countersign it. So that's the process we have to follow. You can refer to any of the resources you want because it's an open book assessment. If you're having any training difficulties or any special needs, let me know. 2 of you here don't speak English as your first language. Fine, you can accommodate that. If I'm going too fast for you, say so. Right? I want to make an agreement with you right now. Do not let me go on to a new subject until you are satisfied that you have understood the point that I'm making. Don't be afraid to keep saying, I don't understand, I don't understand, I don't understand. Because I will keep getting further and further into explanations until you do understand. I need to know when I sign you off that you actually know what you're doing. That's important for me, just as it's important for you. So can we have an agreement on that, guys?
Yep.
Yes? Okay. As with all unit standards, there is an appeal procedure, and NZQA rules require me to tell you about it. So if you're not satisfied with your result, or the way you've gone about getting it, you do have a right to appeal against my decision on that. Right? I would hope in the first instance you would appeal to me, give me a chance to sort out whatever the issue is. But you don't have to. If you don't want to, feel free to go to MITO, the Motor Industry Training Organisation. The logo is on the front of your assessment material. They're the ones who control this unit standard. So if you don't like their answer, or you don't feel like talking to them, you're free to go all the way to the top to NZQA themselves. They've got a whole team of people sitting at their desks in Wellington, just waiting for the phone to go for someone to complain about a training provider. Right? There's a process there, you use it if you feel like you need it. Obviously it won't my aim, just to make sure you don't feel like you need it. Okay, so before I get on to that, let's get those scenarios out that you've got there. The first sheet that I asked you to put your name on top of. Right, and in that scenario is a pretend permit. If you open up to the second page, see a pretend permit there. So let's go through this and have a look at it. Because it doesn't matter what sort of permit that you've got, they're going to follow exactly the same format as the one you've got there in front of you. Taking around the case. I'll put my reading glasses down so I don't know what I've done with them. Okay, I'll have to hold it out at arm's length. No, I know it well enough. Okay, so first of all it says this is a permit to exceed mass limits. So nothing to do with over-dimension. It's purely about overweight. Right? The first line gives you the authority to issue this permit. So it tells you what part of the legislation this permit is issued on. The next line down tells you who the permit has been issued to. Right, so you've got 3 different scenarios here, A, B, C. So Ronald, you've got A. Who is your permit issued to?
Mostly contractors.
Okay, and who's your permit issued to? Really? Hey, third line down. When I find my reading glasses a bit low in here. Who is your permit issued to? Yes. Bigger forest haulage. Yep. And you've got C. Who's your permit issued to? Third one down. Always shifting. Okay. So that's the name of the company. All right. The next line down gives you the TSL. What's a TSL? Transport Service License. That's right. So you're operating under a good service license, which is one of the types of TSL. If the permit does not have a TSL on it, that does not make the permit invalid. have seen some of them have been issued without the TSL, somebody just hasn't bothered to put it in there. Right? But if they know it, that's what it is. And then it tells you what it is that you are authorised to transport. So you've got scenario B, I think, haven't you?
Transport.
Yep, you're issued a transporter. And yours is transporter, I think yours is transporter too. Okay. And then the next line down gives you the registration numbers of all the vehicles in the combination. Alright, the tractor, the first trailer, the second trailer, the third trailer, if you've got one, whatever it is. Alright. If you are stopped on the side of the road and you've actually got a different vehicle from the one labelled on here, you're in deep shit. You've got to make sure your permits match your vehicles. Alright. The next line down says that you are going to make a single trip. And then it tells you what date you're going to do that trip on. Or if you're really smart, you'll put in a range of dates in case the weather's bad on the day you want to go, then you have to delay your trip. If you've only got a single date there and that happens, you've got to go right through and get a whole new permit. Right? So it makes sense to put a range of dates on there. Now, that says a single trip. So this is a single trip permit. When you come to the question there that asks you what type of permit this is, it's a single trip permit. There are other types of permits which we'll talk about when we go back onto the PowerPoint. Alright, now the next line down tells you what it is that you are transporting. So what are you transporting? Okay. And what are you transporting? A log hauler?
Dump truck.
A dump truck. Okay. So if you've got one of those streamline little permits, and when Mr. Plant stops you, you've got a whopping great Caterpillar bulldozer on the back, you're in deep shit. You're not carrying the right load. Alright? Now, for some types of permits, there will not be anything specified there. Right? But for most permits, there actually will be a specification as to what it is that you're transporting. Okay, and then the next one down says that you're transporting it on a route. And it's just a brief overview. You're going from this place to that place. When the question asks you for the route description, we're actually going to go to a different part of the permit to get a very detailed route description. Alright? Now, below that you've got a table. Yes, come in. Just find the PowerPoint there, please. Okay, so the table gives you the number of the axles. Number one is your front steer, and it works all the way back to the last axle in the combination. Then it tells you what the axle type is. Single tyre, twin tyre, type A, whatever it is. Right? And then it gives you the distance from each axle from the one before it. Why do we need to know that?
Loading.
Yep, what's that got to do with the loading?
So we just take the load from.
Yes. Right, remember I made the comment before that there were tables in the VDAM rule that told you how much weight axles we carry and how much spacing. So, for most of the stuff you do, you're not going to be able to change the spacing on your axles, but a lot of the really heavy haulage guys can and do. They change the spacing, they change the width, they change all sorts of things. So when Mr. Bob stops them at the checkpoint, he actually gets his tape measure out and measures them to make sure that the spacings match what's on the curve. Alright, and then the bottom line tells you how much, or what size tyres that you've got in each one. Okay, we need to skip down a little bit further now, and it's got critical conditions. There are 3 critical conditions. And the first one says you must not exceed the maximum gross weight that's specified here in the permit. And if you go through and add up the weights that all those axles could carry, guess what? They come down to that maximum gross weight. Alright? The second one says you can't exceed any of the other legal parameters on the vehicle. Right? Like the GVM, GCM, stuff like that. We'll talk more about those later on. And then the third one says you can't break any of the conditions that are specified in the permit. So those are the 3 critical conditions. And we will come back to those later. Then we come down to some additional conditions. Most of those are just descriptions of what various terms mean, but number 4 is an important one for us. Can you read number 4 for us, please?
Non-transferable. This permit is not transferable either to other uses of or to to any vehicle other than the vehicle described by this permit.
Right. So if you dry hire one of your pump trucks to another concrete company, they have to get their own permit. They can't drive it under your permit because your permit's issued to your permit. That's an important point. I don't know if you ever do that sort of thing, but I know in the crane industry, people often borrow each other's cranes, and that's caused a lot of problems. All right. And number 5. Ronald, can you do number 5 to us?
When police are authorized to direct vehicles up to 5 kilometers from the approved route for the purpose of weighing, provided understrength bridges are not included on the route.
Right. So they can take you 5 k's off your route to put you over the weigh scales. But the police do not have authority to supervise bridge crossings. They don't have that. And they are not allowed to take you over an understrength bridge. And do we have any in Auckland? Yes, we do. We have quite a few bridges in Auckland. If that's not on your specified route, then you can't go across them and they can't make you. Right? Important point for you. Okay, let's look over the page. And the first thing you see is the route and special instructions. So your route's in the form of a table. This one's only got a single line on it. It says you're going to, section 1 is going to go from State Highway 35 from route position 0 bar 0.0 from junction 350 to route position 124 bar 0.0, which all sounds like a whole heap of gobbledygook thrown in. Well, in about half an hour's time, you're going to know exactly what all those things mean. It's actually a very specific one. I've seen permits where that table has been almost an entire page. It's on really long trips. Right? So that's your route description. Now, we come down a little bit further, requirements to be observed. So it tells you much the same sort of thing as we saw in those critical conditions earlier on. Permit's invalid if the vehicle or the people are different. Right? The permit's invalid if it's been altered without authority, and the vehicle and people are not those described. Right? Over the page a little bit further, and now we come to the route notes. And there are a couple of critical ones here. First of all, can you read for me note number 2? Okay. Note 2? Where are you at? Note 2.
This statement must be made of the behind the section of any enforcement officer or unauthorized agent of the entry transportation or a road controlling authority.
Okay. That sounds suspiciously like the answer to a question. In fact, it'll be the answer to the very first question. All right? We'll come to that shortly when we start doing the assessment part. All right. So it doesn't matter what permit you've got. Note 2 is always going to be the note that tells you where your permit has to be carried and who you have to surrender it to. Okay? Another very important one here for us is note 5. Can you read note 5 for us, please?
Every railroad crossing, federal or railroad crossing is not called grade by instrument. The radar of other reach and other dimensions identify the wide permission requirement in the law of the agent of federal or railroad level crossing.
Good. And once again, doesn't matter what permit you've got, that is always going to be specified in note 5. Right? These are a standard format. Right? They're always on there. They just go and print the other extra details that they need onto it. So the important thing to take out of that is the road controlling authorities own the roads, they don't own the railway tracks. Kiwi Rail does. Right? So you've got to get their permission before you cross them. But that permit that I've put out here before tells you what the mass limits and dimension limits are before you come into that regime. So as long as you meet their requirements, you don't need to get them. Now, we also take overweight vehicles into other places where the road controlling authorities don't own the road. classic example is the airport. The moment you go in past the welcome signs, those roads now belong to the airport authority, and you need to get their permission before you take overweight and over-dimensional vehicles onto their site. Particularly with regards to cranes, or things like your concrete trucks where you poke stuff up a long way up in the air, they are legally required under the Aviation Authority to provide all pilots, not just airline pilots, but all pilots with what they call NOTAMs, notice to airmen. Right? Anything that's sticked up above a certain height in the airport precinct, pilots have to be told about it, and they've got to be given a month's notice. So getting permission at short notice to go into the airport with something that can poke stuff up in the air is actually pretty problematic. I know at Specialist Lifting and Transport Group, we were often getting requests from Air New Zealand Engineering. They'd say, oh, we've got something that we need lifted, can you bring a crane out tomorrow? And we learned very quickly to say, yeah, we can do that, but you need to organise the permits with the authority because we're sick of jumping through their hoops.
Been through it.
So you know what I'm talking about.
I've done the runway. They're doing the demolition of the old runway.
Yes.
Oh, you can't do this, the traffic controllers just coming.
Yeah.
The safety officers, and I said, there's no other way we can do it.
Yeah. They're a nightmare to deal with.
Yeah.
You have the same issue on the ports. Right? The moment you go in the gate of the port, you're now on Port Authority roads, and you have to get permission from that. And they are very particular about where you go with overweight vehicles, because remember, most of the port is actually out over the water on jetties, and the last thing they want to do is have you fall through the dock. Right? Also, if you're going on private property, you need to make sure you get the permission of the property owner. Right? And you'll say to them, how strong is your driveway? Oh, yeah, she's fine. And then you go in there and crack the concrete up and they expect you to pay for it. Right? Yeah. Hoops that you have to jump through. Okay, let's turn over the page. Alright, now at the top of the next page, which is titled Critical Conditions with Bridge Restrictions, and there are a couple of things in there about external supervision. There are times when you have to get a local authority engineer to come and watch you cross the bridge. It notes here specifically that a police officer is not empowered to supervise you crossing a bridge. Right? So if a policeman tries to tell you to go over a bridge, feel free to tell him to bugger off. He doesn't have the authority to direct you across a bridge. Right? The other important thing to note is in that little table down there, if you need an external supervisor, they're going to put his contact details on there. But on this permit that you've got there in front of you, you don't need an external supervisor. It says that a BESS registered driver is able to do the supervision. So what you need to take from that is that when you are crossing bridges under your BESS authority, you are acting as an NZTA agent. Alright? So that carries a lot of responsibility. You need to be very clear about it. Okay, and then in the table down below we've got the list of all the bridges. I will remind you of all this later, but let's just run through it now. So the first column is the bridge number. Now, when you look at bridge number 1 there, when you drive over that bridge, you won't see a sign that says this is bridge number 1. Right? That's just the sequential number that they appear in your report. Right? And then it tells you what state highway you're on. It gives you the route position for the bridge. So one wasn't a good example. Let's go down to this one. So bridge 5, it's on State Highway 35, and the bridge position is, trying to read this, 21/0.0. Right? Like I said, we will tell you more about that. Then you've got the name of the bridge. And then you've got the BSN. BSN stands for Bridge Structure Number. That sign you will see on the bridge. Right? So in this particular one, it's 210. That sign will be on the bridge. Then it tells you what is the speed that you're allowed to cross the bridge at. This one says 10 kilometres an hour. Sometimes it might be 20, sometimes it might be 50. Right? Then it tells you what position on the bridge your truck has to be. This one says own lane. Fine, no problem. We'll just drive across the bridge like we're in a car. Right? But it might say opposite bridge, in which case you're actually going to be driving on the other side of the road. You got to close the bridge down to do that. Or it might be central, where you're actually straddling the centre lines across the bridge. Right? Then it's going to tell you what's the risk to other motorists. So if you're on your own lane, then obviously the risk of getting low or not significant. But if you are crossing central, straddling the centre line for instance, then the risk to other traffic's pretty bloody high. And that makes a big difference as to what traffic control you have to have. And then the last column is just the GPS coordinates for the bridge. We're not interested in that. Now you do occasionally find other comments. One of you there will have on your permit a comment between Bridge 1 and Bridge 2 that gives you a slightly different definition of the term central. Right? That's a bridge coming out of the port of Timaru, and it's actually got a big concrete barrier down the middle like we have on the Auckland Harbour Bridge. But you have to go over central. Well, it's a bit bloody difficult to drive across the bridge straddling the concrete barrier. So what they've said is, in this particular case, we're going to redefine central as being in the middle of your half of the road. So you've got two lanes on the left-hand side, you're going to straddle the lane line, right? Which is different from our normal definition of central. One of the other ones has a comment a bit further down the page about a bridge in Caravan, and it says you must be a minimum distance off the side of the road. Alright, you need to look out for that. Alright, so that's the structure of your permit. Do you have any questions on that? You realise that.
What's the difference between we've got a low and high and then not significant?
Is it driving your own way?
Not significant means there's absolutely no risk whatsoever. So there won't be any restrictions on the bridge. So if you're in a 70k zone, for instance, you'll be able to cross the bridge at 70. If the risk is low, there's still not a lot of risk, you're still in your own lane, but you may find that there will be other restrictions, like you might be restricted to 10k.
You go a little bit faster.
Well, it just means there won't be restrictions. Yeah. Alright, so let's mosey along then. So, a single trip permit means you can make a single trip on a particular date, or as I said before, if you're smart, you're going to do it between a set of dates. Or you might have a multiple trip permit, which says you can go whatever number of times you specify as being necessary, so it might be 5 times, on that particular route between particular dates that are specified. If you specify 5 trips and they catch you doing trip number 7, you're in deep shit, you've breached your permit conditions. Right? Then you have a continuous permit. This still specifies the route, but you can go up and down here as many times as you like for the next 2 years. Right? That permit usually use you for 2 years. We carried most of the bridge greens for the Kaikoura coast rebuild. It was built 30.5 kilometres bridge basically down the side of the coast. And most of those beams came out of Rotorua and Tauranga. We had 2 transporter teams operating on Tauranga, 2 transporter teams operating on Rotorua. So that was a tractor, the front dolly, the rear dolly, 3 pilots for each one, and a spare vehicle as well. And what we did on our permit was we actually listed all of the vehicles for each of those 4 teams, plus 2 complete spare sets, so that they could mix and match them however they liked. Right? And it was a continuous permit for 2 years. We actually went up and down the Toowoomba road for 16 weeks, I think it was, non-stop. Down, back, have a day off, down, back, have a day off. Yeah, it's a huge job. We're talking 60 metre, 80 tonne vehicles. Yeah. Finally, there is an area permit. If you're primarily operating in Auckland for your overweight vehicles, that will be the permit that you will have. The area permit does not specify a route. It gives you a list of all the places in the area. It says you can go anywhere you like for the next 2 years. Right? It used to be up until about a year ago that an area permit for Auckland covered the area from Bombay to Kaitaia. They split that up about a year ago. Now an area permit for Auckland quite literally means Auckland. Right? The northern boundary, it still starts at Bombay, but the northern boundary is Warkworth, I think, somewhere around there. And then there is another area now from there to Whangarei, and another one from Whangarei north. So if you're heading up north, then you're going to have permits from 3 different authorities. Right. So, question 1. Open up your assessment schedule, question 1. And somebody read out what question 1 is asking you.
Task 1. Answer questions about overweight permits to position of the vehicle on the roof.
No, you're not on the question. Question 1.
Question 1. All overweight permits contain the condition that covers carrying the permit and allowing the permit to be inspected by authorised parties.
Yeah, so remember I got somebody to read that out before as we were going through the permit. Remember where it was? It was in note 2. Right? So what does the question ask you? It asks you whether in the permit you will find that condition. Yes? The answer is very simple. It is note 2. That's all.
He's going to give you the answer, okay? It's just a matter of you motherfuckers listening.
Guys, he told you guys, when the screen is in blue, that's the answer. So you guys just need to look up there.
But you
Not
need to
listening,
understand
I just maybe I've got a spare set. Old instructions, they're not quite as good as the new ones.
They're in your back, but
Not in your bag?
No,
Oh, in the briefcase.
I've still got the case in my pocket. So I don't know what I've done with it. Okay, now I can at least see. So what have you written? Yes. Okay. Now the next question, B, says where must you carry it? Right? And you must carry it in the vehicle. Okay, now the next part of the question says, who do you have to produce it to? And there are 3 people. You must produce your permit to